We're going to have a look at some more of the look and feel functions today. We're going to look at styling some knobs and sliders. So we'll have some vertical sliders, some horizontal sliders, and some rotary sliders, also known as knobs. So we're going to start pretty much the same as we have done with the previous look and feel tutorials. If you haven't seen those, by the way, I'll leave links in the usual places. So the first thing we need to do is get our entry point into the look and feel world, and that's done by creating a constant object, which we'll call LAF, L-A-F, and that's going to be equal to engine create global script look and feel. And from now on, we use this LAF object to access our look and feel functions. So the first thing we're going to do is add some controls to our interface. So we'll have a slider. This one we'll have as, we'll actually use this one as a knob. So we'll give it a range of 0 to 100. Middle position can be 50. Default value, that can also be 50. And we'll make it square because this is just going to be a regular knob. We're going to add 2 more sliders. This one's going to be a horizontal slider. We'll give it a width of 100 and a height of 20. And we'll leave the range of this one 0 to 1. We'll just change the style to horizontal, and we'll set the middle position to 0.5 and the default value to 0.5. And we'll add 1 more. And this is going to be vertical, so we'll give it a width of 20 and a height of 200. And we'll set the style to vertical. We'll also set the middle position of this one to 0.5 and the default value to 0.5 as well, and the range is 0 to 1. I'm going to select all of these controls and just enable the value pop-up so that we can see the value later on. When we're actually changing the value, it will give us this little pop-up there. Okay, now we're ready to begin creating our look and feel styles for these controls. We're going to start with the rotary slider or the knob. So we write LAF, so that's our LAF object, put a dot, and we're going to register a function. And now I'm using the new script editor, so if I go to the autocomplete, it actually has register function there, but more than that, it has all the different register functions that are available for the look and feel. So we can see draw alert window icon, so it's really helpful. We're going to scroll down to draw rotary slider. So that's the one we want, and the autocomplete has filled in all the blanks for us. Again, this is stuff that I covered in the previous intro video, so if you haven't seen it, go check that out so you can follow along. What's going to happen when I press F5, our rotary knob here will just disappear because it's now using this look and feel function instead of the standard graphic. So if I hit F5, it's gone, but because we've got that value pop up, you can see when I move the control, we can still see the value change. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get the area of the knob and store it in a variable called A, just for convenience. So that's going to be equal to obj.area. And this knob is going to be drawn as an ellipse, so we're going to fill an ellipse. But before we do that, we need to set the color. So g.setColor, obj, and we're going to use the background color, so bg color. And then we'll fill the ellipse, so g.fillEllipse. And for the area, we'll just put A, so it will make a circle the full size of the knob. So if I hit F5, there we go. And if I select it, we can see it is taking up the full frame that we've defined. And if we make that bigger or smaller, it will stretch with it. Let's change the background color of this just to make it a bit more interesting. We'll have it, let's have a dark gray color. Something like that. And now we're going to draw another ellipse within this one that's slightly smaller. So write g.setColor, and we'll use the item color 1 this time. obj.itemColor1, g.fillEllipse. And because we want it to be a different size, we want it to be smaller, we're going to have to define the area ourselves, the x, y, width and height. So we're going to have it be 10 from the left, 10 from the top, and we want it to be 10 from the right, so we're going to take the full width, which will be A2, so that's from our A object we defined up here, and we're going to minus 20. The reason we're minusing 20 is we want to account for the 10 we've added already to the left-hand side. We've shifted it over by 10, and then we want to subtract 10 from the right-hand side. And we're going to do exactly the same for the height, so it'll be A3 minus 20. And if I hit F5, we should have a smaller circle that's centered within this first circle. Now we can't see that very well. Let's change the color. So item color 1. There we go. And we haven't got any rotation on this yet, and we've got nothing to indicate the rotation. So let's work on that. So what we're going to do is we're going to draw an indicator just somewhere sort of in the middle of the control here. Let's zoom in a bit on there. So we'll draw the indicator here. So we'll draw that first, and then we'll discuss the rotation. So we'll use the object's item color 2. And we'll draw this as a rounded rectangle. So fill rounded rectangle. The area we'll come to in a minute. That's the XY width and height. And the corner size, we'll make that 5 for now. We can always change that later. So the width and the height are the easy part. So let's give it a width of 8 and a height of 40. So for the X, we want this to be dead center. So for the X, we need to first of all work out the middle of the circle, and that's going to be the width, which is A2, divided by 2, and then we've got to subtract the width of the rounded rectangle that we're actually drawing. So we've given it a width of 8, so we're going to subtract 8 and divide that by 2. So that will draw it dead center. And if we set Y to 0 for now, it will draw it dead center and it will be at the top. I've got an extra semicolon there, I'll just delete that. So if we hit compile, there it is. And now we can shift it down a little bit. Let's change this 0 value for the Y. Let's change that to 8 as well. See how that looks. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Let's stick with that, and we'll change the color of it. So now we've got an indicator which we wanted to point in the direction indicating the value. So that's the next thing to work on. So the way we're going to draw this line in different positions is by rotating the knob as we draw. So you can think of this as like you're holding a pencil on a piece of paper and you're rotating the paper rather than moving the pencil. And the first thing to decide is what position we want this indicator to point at when our knob has a value of 0. And what we're going to do is we're going to have it pointing sort of down here in the bottom left. And we're doing this, the values we're going to be using aren't degrees, we're going to use radians. And to get it to point in the bottom left, that's going to be a value of 2.5. So we'll create a variable, we'll call it start, and we'll give it a value of 2.5. And then we need to decide where we want it to end. So we want it to end sort of over here in the bottom right, basically a mirror image of the start position. So we're going to have var end equals start times 2 times obj.value normalized minus start. Now this won't make much sense at the moment, so I'm going to show you the next part and then I'll go back to this and explain what's happening here. So now we're going to rotate our canvas using the g.rotate function. And you can see it's wanting an angle in radians, and we're going to give it end, our end variable, as the angle, and then it wants a center position. So this is the point at which it's going to rotate around, and we want it to rotate around the center of our circle. And the easiest way to get the center is to have A2 divided by 2, and A3, the height, divided by 2. In this case, the height and the width are the same, so we could just do A2 for both of these or A3 for both of these. It wouldn't make a difference. And now we'll hit F5, and we can see that the indicator now rotates around. So let's go back to this end thing here. So we know the start position is 2.5. That's where we've got our indicator starting, and it's in the bottom left, like I said it would be. If we change this value to, let's say, 3.1, that's going to put us pretty much at the dead center at the bottom of the knob here when we're at a value of 0. And anything greater than that, so 3.5, will put us before that center line. And if we go lower, it will be more on this side. So now we're at about the 9 o'clock position. So 2.5 tends to be a good starting point, so that's why I used it. But you can play around with that and adjust it to meet your needs. Okay, so the end position, this decides how far around the indicator is going to go before it stops, so how much we're rotating our canvas. So if I change this times 2 to times 1, so now we're at our start position times 1, and it's only going to go as far as the middle. So the times 2 is basically how many halves of the circle we're going to cover. So now if we change this to 20, for example, our indicator will spin around about 8 times before we get to the end. So if you want to do something crazy like that, that's how you do that. But generally you're going to want to leave that at 2. The obj.value normalized is the knob's value normalized to a range of 0 to 1. So the range of our knob is actually 0 to 100. We could change that to anything we wanted, but the normalized range, which is given to us through the obj object, is the range of the knob, or the value of the knob, scaled to a range of between 0 and 1. And you can think of that like a percentage. So what we're doing here is we're multiplying it by that normalized value. So it's the same as taking a percentage of the value. So if we're halfway around, that would be 0.5 for a normalized value. And if you multiply anything by 0.5, you get 50% of it. So what we're doing here is essentially multiplying our start value by 2. And remember, this start value is in radians, so we're multiplying our angle by 2, and then getting a percentage of that based on the value of the knob. And then we're subtracting our start position. And that gives us a knob that goes around in the full range and ends in a mirror image of where it started, which is generally what you want, but you can play around with these values to do all kinds of crazy things. I explained about this center position, but we could change that. So instead of dividing it by 2, let's divide that by 3, for example, and you can see it's now rotating around a weird sort of off-center point. I don't know why you'd want that, but you might want it. But generally, you'll leave that as 2. Let's make this a bit shorter, actually. We have it at 40. I'm going to make it 30. Yeah, that's a bit better. And just as a demonstration, what I said about we're actually rotating the entire canvas and keeping our pencil in the same position. If I just fill this in, let's do g.setColor, colors.blue, g.fill rectangle. And if I just fill in a rectangle, you'll see what's actually happening. You can see the whole thing is being rotated, but our line that we're drawing is being drawn in the same position. So hopefully that gives you a better understanding of what is actually going on here. So we're not drawing the line in a different position as far as the maths of it are concerned. We're just rotating the canvas on which we're drawing the line. Okay, and that's pretty much it for rotary knobs. This will work with a bipolar knob as well, so if we set this to, give it a range of -100, set the middle position to 0. So it will work just the same, and the center is now 0. Let's take a look at the horizontal slider now. The default slider in HISE fills up the value from one side to the other, so we can see this dark grey. In fact, let's change the colour of that. Let's have this colour as the background, and let's fill it with a sort of greeny colour. There we go. There. So you can see the value fills up from one side to the other, and we could do this with the look and feel as well and make it round it or change the style however we wanted. But I thought it'd be more interesting rather than just doing one of these bars that fills up, which I think I've actually done in another tutorial, the one on with paint routines. I think we did it that way. Rather than doing that, I thought we'd do more like a fader style slider where it's got a paddle that moves from one side to the other. So we're going to register a look and feel function. So LAF, register, spell things correctly first of all, register function. And we're going to look for the horizontal, the linear slider, there it is. So the linear slider will affect both the horizontal slider and the vertical slider. Let's bring that onto the screen so we can see that one. And we'll change the colours of that one as well while we're here. So I just hit compile there, and of course our sliders have just disappeared because we've registered a function, but we're going to get them back in a moment. So this function will apply to both sliders, horizontal and vertical, because it doesn't know the difference, it's just applying to all linear sliders. But we know the difference. The difference between a horizontal slider and a vertical slider is the width to height ratio. So we can do a test to see if this is a vertical slider or a horizontal slider with styling and take the appropriate action. So first of all, we'll do the usual thing. We'll get the object's area into an A variable. And then we'll do a test to see how the width and the height compare to each other. So we'll say if the width is greater than the height, then it must be horizontal. Otherwise, it must be vertical. So already we can differentiate between our horizontal slider and our vertical slider. I'm just going to interrupt myself here because as I was editing this video, I realized that we don't actually need to check the width to height ratio to determine if we're using a vertical or a horizontal slider. We can actually just get this property directly from the OBJ object. So I've got a slider here set to horizontal. You can see there some stuff's just popped up in the console. That's because what I'm doing here is printing out the OBJ object. And what we can see is we have a property called style, and that's currently set to 2. Now if I change this slider's style to vertical, you see the style over here changes to 3. So we can actually use that property instead. We don't have to use the width and the height, so we could just write if obj.style equals 2, then that's going to be horizontal. Is that right? I think it's horizontal. Yep. Otherwise it's vertical. So that would be horizontal, and that would be vertical. And interestingly, if you change the style to range, then this OBJ style is changed to 9 for some reason. I'm not sure where all the other values in between went, but if it's range, then the style will be 9. And obviously if you set the style to knob, then it won't come into this function at all, because this is for drawing a linear slider. It will then go into the draw rotary slider. So the reason you'd want to use this instead of comparing the width and the height is you may want to have a horizontal slider that's really tall and is actually taller than it is wide, so something like this. Or you may want to have a vertical slider that's really long and thin. So those are two scenarios where this would be a more preferable solution. Alright, let's get back to the main video. Now let's start colouring these in. So we'll fill the background colour for both of them actually. It'll be exactly the same, so we don't need to do that in this if statement. We can do it outside. We're going to do g.fillAll obj.bgColor. So because this applies to both the horizontal and the vertical slider, we don't need to worry about putting this bit of the code in the if statement. So we've got our backgrounds back. So we'll do the horizontal slider first. We're going to set the colour, obj.itemColor1, and then we're going to, like I say, it's going to be like a little paddle that we can move back and forwards, or a fader, however you want to think of it. So we're going to fill that as a rounded rectangle, and we'll put the area in here, x, y, width and height, and the corner size, that can be 10 for now. So let's fill this in. So the height, we'll make it the height of the slider. So that can just be A3. The width, we'll make it the width of the slider divided by, let's divide it by 4. So it's a quarter of the total width of the slider. So this means if you change the size of your slider, the size of the fader will change to match it. We could have done a similar thing with the indicator line on our knob actually, instead of using fixed values, but we'll leave it as it is for now. The Y position, that's an easy one, that can be 0. So if I change X here, we'll just put 10 for now, just so we can see what it's going to look like. So we can see that's kind of what our slider will look like. Let's change this, I think that's a bit too rounded. There we go, we'll change that to 5. So the only thing we've got to work out is the X position. So if the X position is 100, it will move further along. So this is the only value we've got to calculate based on the actual value of the slider. So we're going to store this in a variable called X, and this is going to be equal to something, we're not sure what yet, but when we decide it, X is going to go in there. So X is going to be equal to the full width of the slider, so A2, multiplied by the normalized value, so that's similar to what we're using for the knob. So we're multiplying it by a percentage essentially, so if the value of the slider is at 0.5 at the middle position, then we're taking the width and dividing it by 2, and if the value is at 0.25, then we'll be dividing it by a quarter, etc. And I'll hit F5, and now we should be able to move this back and forward, but we'll have a little bit of a problem. So far so good, but we're going off the page here. So we need to take into account the width of the paddle that we've drawn, and at the moment we don't know the exact width. It will vary. We've got it here, which is the width divided by 4. So instead of having it just here, we're going to put this into a variable. So we'll make a variable for the width, and it's going to be equal to A2 divided by 4. And that means we can delete this and just replace that with W. And now we can use this W variable in our X calculation as well. So what we actually need to do is subtract the width of the paddle from our X position, and that also needs to be multiplied by the normalized value. Going off the page there a bit, but that's okay. Let's make a bit more room. And I've got a typo somewhere. Oh, there we go. So now it should, yeah, there we go, we bump right up to the edges now. Rather than have this being the full height of the slider, we could actually inset this a bit. So let's change that 0 to a 2, and instead of the height being A3, we'll do A3 minus 4. So now it's inset from the top and bottom. We can also inset it from the left and right. And to do that, let's say we want to inset it 2 from the left. We just add 2 to the end of our calculation here. You can see it's set in 2, but now when we get to this end, it's going to go right up to the edge again. So onto the paddle width, just in this calculation, we need to add 4. So I've hit F5 now. So that sets us in 2 from the right-hand side and 2 from the left-hand side. So the right-hand side value here is always going to be double the left-hand side value. So if this was 5, then this would have to be 10. Unless you wanted them to be uneven, of course. You could have that as 5 if you wanted, and then it's going to be closer. So you can adjust that to suit your needs. Okay, and that's pretty much it for the horizontal one. Again, this should work if it's a bipolar slider as well, so we'll change the range here to -1, middle position 0, default value 0. And the reason it works so perfectly every time is because we're using the object's normalized value, which compresses the value, the real value of whatever the slider's at, to that range of 0 to 1. Okay, lastly, let's look at the vertical slider. This is very similar to the horizontal slider. And in fact, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set the color of this slider to the item color 1, which is exactly the same as we did for the horizontal. So since they're both doing the same thing as their first step, we can take that outside of the if statement. And similarly to what we've got for the horizontal, we're going to need a variable for the height of the paddle this time, not the width. And that's going to be A3 divided by 4. So you can see it's very similar, just instead of the width, we're using the height. And we're going to need a Y variable, and that's going to be a bit different, so we'll come on to that in a moment. But we'll start with the same basic thing, so we'll fill the rounded rectangle. Corner size can be 5 again. And the area, X, Y, width and height. The height we've already got, that's here. The Y, that is going to be the Y value there. For now, the X can be 0. And the width can be the width of the slider. So that'll be A2. So if we set the Y to 10 for now, we can see we're in a similar position to how we were when we started off with our horizontal slider. And changing the Y position just moves the paddle up or down. So now we've just got to calculate this. So we can actually take our basic calculation we have for the horizontal slider here and just substitute the width for the height. Although there are going to be some changes. So it'll be A3 times the normalized value minus the height times the normalized value and let's see what happens there. So we're actually in reverse. So as I increase the value, the slider goes down. So we're actually reversed. And the reason is that the 0 position on the y-axis is at the top of the slider, not the bottom of the slider. Whereas the 0 position on the x-axis is at the left-hand side. So it works fine for a horizontal one, but it needs a bit more tuning for a vertical one. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take the height of the entire slider, A3, and we're going to subtract our positioning value that we've calculated from that. So that gets us a little bit closer to where we want to be, but we're going off at both ends here. So what we have to do to account for that going off at both ends is where we're subtracting the height here, we then have to add on the height as well. So now the calculation becomes slightly different because now we're subtracting the height from this part and we're adding the height multiplied by the normalized value afterwards. So I'll hit compile and that will give us our basic vertical slider. But let's take it further. Let's do the same as we did with our horizontal one and inset the values because it's slightly different to the horizontal one. So we'll inset the x value by 2 and that means we subtract 4 from the width. So that gets us our basic inset on the left and right. And now to do the top and bottom, it's similar to what we did with this stuff here, but we've got to do a little bit extra to it. So whereas with the horizontal one we added 2 to the end and then added 2 to the width, with the vertical one we're going to do it all in the middle here. So we're going to add onto each of these h values, these height values. So we're going to add 4 to this one, and we're going to add 2 to this one. And I'll hit compile now. And if I've done that right, we should now be inset. So we're inset from the bottom there. We're not inset from the top, so that means I've put these the wrong way around. That should be 2 there and 4 there. There we go. So that's how you inset on a vertical slider. This is one of those rare occasions where I'm going to say, don't worry too much about the details and understanding all of this. You can literally just copy and paste what I've put here, stick it into your own project and just tweak the values until it does what you want. And the reason I say that is because that's what I did mostly. This is code that other people have originally posted, and then I've tweaked it to meet my needs and adjusted it to be written in a slightly different way, so I can manage it the way I like to and maintain it the way I like to in my projects. But this basic code isn't original with me, and there's no reason it should be original with you. It's kind of just a drop-in thing that you put in to do what you want. I mean, all knobs are roughly going to appear like this. All horizontal sliders and vertical sliders are going to roughly appear like that. So there's no reason to rewrite the same code over and over again. Take this, put it in, tweak it, and it should do what you want. I hope you found this video helpful. Let me know if you've got any questions or comments. Higher tier patrons will be getting the project files for this video. In fact, I'll probably just post it as a HISE snippet. And if you're not following me on Patreon, there is a link in the video description for you to join me there. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.